3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, and 1 ring for the dark lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I do hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am an author, and welcome to my writing space. I'm coming here today. I know this video is labeled Talking Tuesday, but I started it and never got it finished yesterday, so it's going to be on Wednesday. Is going to be me following up on some videos I posted at the beginning of the year. I'll link them at the end of the video. Around Tolkien more generally and the influence on me, as well as more specifically and also a video on The Hobbit. This time I'm going to talk about what is, to this day, still my favorite book, The Lord of the Rings. I'm a little ashamed to admit that it's been a few years since I've read it, and I really should remedy that sometime soon. You can see it's, one of my very clear pride of place books here right behind me. Yeah, it's... Hey, y'all, editing John coming in here a few hours later. Realized when I was going through and editing it, I forgot a couple of things. First off, I wanted to put at the beginning of the video as well as the end. I would love to hear your comments, anything about Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, The Hobbit, anything that I've talked about or will be rambling about here today in the following video. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments, linked down below. As well as it'd be awesome and really help me in the channel out if you were to like, share, subscribe, check out my website and socials, my books, all of that will be below and would be greatly appreciated. And I also didn't, I noticed that I never ended up talking about anything about, which is fairly important for the book, just how much I love, particularly in Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's language. I talk some about, the plot and the color. Like, it's just an exceptionally well told. It's first off an exceptionally well told adventure story with some great and vivid, like some wonderful and vivid characters, and just wonderfully vivid language that really allows you to imagine the world you in and really sucks you into the story. Are maybe a few of his descriptions a little long-winded, particularly of forests and trees as the, means go? Maybe a little, but that really doesn't detract just the imagery you get from the story and just the beautiful language through it. I mean, that's the reason I chose to read. I mean, just how much does that opening poem, 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, and so on, that I read at the beginning, how much does that really just, it draws you in, like, to the story? Like, you want to read more once you read that poem he starts the book with. And just such a variety of poems and songs and languages and tales within tales. It really truly is, like, it fits well as inventing the modern fantasy genre really definitely borrows some from, the epics of the ancient medieval world, where you get a lot of, like, side stories, narrations, stories within stories, branching narratives. It's great. It's really great. And yeah, so I hope you enjoy my little poetry reading at the beginning, and I'm going to have another one at the end. Stay tuned and check that out. But I'll get you back to earlier in the day, John. It's a story that I've enjoyed for as long as I can remember, and it's one where sort of my interaction with it has really changed a fair amount over the years. I mean, I first, after reading The Hobbit to me when I was like 4 or so, My dad did then read The Lord of the Rings to me, and I remember being very like captivated by the story. And I probably had to have read it for the first time on my own before I was 10, and have read it in my 37 years. I've read it at least half a dozen, I think maybe closer to like 10 times, and very much come away with a different thing each time. And my thoughts have evolved on it a little bit, as both I've learned more about it more generally, as well as just as I've gotten older, and had new experiences, read other thing, literature and stuff like that. I remember I used to find, as much as I love the whole thing, parts of it boring. Like, I used to find the first half of Fellowship, basically from, the first chapter or two, are pretty good. And then the Journey of the Ring to Rivendell, I initially felt kind of boring. Um, there were periods where I found parts of Frodo's bit of the story boring. Um, I remember when I was younger also thinking the end of the story was a little weird. The Scouring of the Shire was a little weird and off-putting, but slowly I've come to evolve and understand. My understanding. Like, I have a much better appreciation for the first half of Fellowship, so that first like 10 chapters or so until they get to Rivendell. Now that I've come to sort of more of an understanding that those chapters are very much written when, to my understanding, if I'm wrong, please someone comment down below. I'd love to get more information. Um, get more information on that. So I would definitely, but that my understanding is those first 10 chapters or so are very much um, um, were written when Tolkien was still writing The Lord of the Rings as just a sequel to The Hobbit, which The Hobbit is very episodic. It's very, you know, yes, there's the continuing through story of the quest for Erebor, but it's very much like each chapter is a very like distinct like episode. I mean, you have the party, and then you have the second chapter. I think it's the second chapter is centered around their encounter with the trolls, and then you know the third chapter, I think they get to Rivendell, and it's centered around that. And the fourth chapter is and you get that same kind of you've got Bill in the Lord of the Rings. You've got Bilbo's party. You've got Bilbo's party. You've got the ring leaving the Shire. You've got you know the old the old forest and Tom Bomb. The first meeting with Tom, and so on. And it is my theory. I don't know for certain. It's again, this is another thing. If you know for certain, if you know or have more information, I'd love to hear that. But it is my opinion that because my understanding is about when they got to Rivendell ish in sort of in terms of writing, is when for Tolkien Lord of the Rings started evolving from being a sequel to The Hobbit, which The Hobbit only has sort of vague references. Honestly, I think Tolkien just put in to just amuse himself, but sort of vague references to his broader legendarium, to really the final chapter of the legendarium. I think that sort of took place right around Rivendell. And well, obviously Tolkien went back and changed some things for those earlier chapters. The importance of the ring raids, I imagine, were probably added or at least updated, and some other things in there. So I think some of that makes a little bit more sense, and how that goes. But really, that's and how that goes, how that evolves. evolved, and having edited and now edited books myself, I don't entirely blame Tolkien for not fully integrating that first 10 chapters or so into sort of a more oh so sorry sort of a more flowing narrative, because that's a similar thing. My first book, Shadows of the Past, very much the same thing. Like when I started writing it, I was pretty, you started writing it, it was very sort of episodic, and then sort of it evolved into the chapter sort of having a more natural flow to them, and sort of a more interconnected flow to them, and editing those together. That was some of the most tedious editing. So I don't exactly blame Tolkien for not really doing that much. Um, Rambling on that now, but that makes sense to me. So yeah, what I would say, so that came into it, and you know, just really appreciating, and then as I also got older, I really started appreciating the Frodo story a little bit more. That really, I mean, people make fun of Frodo a little bit. I think, oh, in Tolkien's own words, Sam is the more traditional hero. But, really, as I've gotten older, I've really started to appreciate how important the character of Frodo is. He's very much sort of a martyr character, and just how well written it is in that regard is that, like, Sam's the hero. Sam's the one who tends to get them out of scrapes and does the heroic things, but that Frodo is very much giving all of himself. Like, he is giving every ounce of his, energy, strength, willpower, spirit, whatever. It's how much it's literally draining him down, carrying the ring. And some people have commented like, oh, he doesn't, he kind of fails. He doesn't, if it wasn't for Gollum, he wouldn't have destroyed the ring. But that's kind of the point. Is it took tremendous and selfless effort to even get the ring to that point, and that really he never, and the fact that he really never recovers for that, and that for the sake of the world he loves, and for the sake of good and all that stuff, how much he's really sacrificed and given up before going off to his reward at the end. um so I've come to appreciate that more. And then the last time or two I've read it as a full adult, I've come to really appreciate a lot more what an almost unique thing it is. I'm sure there's others. There's others examples, but I can't think of many examples in the fantasy genre where there is a book that very specifically takes place at the end of the age of magic, legend, myth, whatever you want to call it. That it's very much, this is very much the final note. There's some things that linger on past the destruction of the ring and the death of, and the not death, the deep, the breaking of Sauron's power. There's some stuff that lingers on, but really it is the end of that age of like myth and magic and legends. The only thing that springs to mind that's even kind of similar, that sort of has a similar note, is some of the, like, Le Morte d'Arthur, like the end of the Arthurian cycle of you know Arthur is mortally wounded fighting his son in many versions of it, Mordred, and is taken off to be healed to return again someday. But that has a sort of a similar vein of, that's sort of the end of magic and myth, and Britain in that case is sort of, there's a vibe to that. That's the only thing I can think of. I'm sure there's others. If you have any, particularly that you'd like to recommend, because I love that type of story, I would put that below. But I've increasingly picked up on those notes of, there's beautiful melancholy that that sort of is a through line of the book. That yes, there's the good guys win. Aragorn is king. Arnor and Gondor. Arnor is reestablished. Arnor and Gondor are reunited under him. But there's just a note of it, of through it all that like with the and they even specifically say it at the Council of Rivendell is that the elves, particularly the high elves or the Noldor, whatever phrase you want to use for it, realize that because they've connected themselves so much with the rings, that the destruction of the one ring means the end of their time on Earth. They have to, if they stay, they're going to fade. If they don't stay and fade, they're going to they have to leave. It's really that's the symbolic of the age of magic, and that's really the elves don't really actively in some of his unfinished tales. I know unfinished tales and sort of side stories and notes. There's Lothlorien fighting Dol Guldur, and I think there's some battles going on with the Woodland Realm up in Mirkwood, and Legolas's father. But there's a lot of, but really, the elves don't fight too much of the war because they're, it very much connects back to the rest of Tolkien's legendarium. That in very many ways, the elves have finally have learned their lesson. That I think as Elrond very specifically says, they're not going to. They've accepted their fate that the ring needs to be destroyed, even if it means the end of their time on Earth. That they're no longer going to listen to Sauron. They're no longer going to serve Sauron, listen to his counsels. They might run away from him, but they're not going to be. They finally learn the wisdom not to be like tricked by them and sort of fall into the trap of they don't mean to be evil, but oftentimes it's trying to hold on to their possessions, that sort of note of pride of hold on to their possessions, hold on to their title, hold on to their power of Middle Earth, has in multiple occasions, particularly in the Second Age, allowed Sauron to continue thriving. So, and in the First Age, the whole war against Morgoth too. So but there's just like a melancholy to it, and just some wonderful notes that I never would have picked up as a kid, that like Gimli and Legolas being just this wonderful sort of running commentary on what's going on, and at one point sort of commenting how they find that like humans have such tremendous potential but very rarely live up to it. It's very Tolkien gets a lot, is often identified as being having a very binary morality, black and white, good and evil. But there's a lot more. There's a really, if you read his stuff, I think that's, as is often the case, sort of something that comes a lot more from Tolkien's many imitators. I mean, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings basically invented's not quite the right word, but sort of like reformed the fantasy genre into what it has been ever since in the last. Ooh, we're getting up on 90 years for The Hobbit, I think, in a couple of years here. And I think we're almost at 70? Almost 70 years? Or is it 70 years this year? Anyway, I'm rambling. It's a brilliant and such a deep book, and there is a lot more in Tolkien's, not just the Silmarillion, but that note of sadness and melancholy, and every I can't remember which, but the one, everywhere hope is mixed with grief. That there is a lot more sort of gray and nuance than I think Tolkien is often, because of his imitators, than Tolkien is really given credit for. Like you do have the polar, the Valar, Sauron, and Morgoth. You do have the very dynamic poles, but there's a lot of gray area in between, and it's such a it's so gripping. It's such a I can't speak enough. I mean, I hope I didn't issue any kind of spoiler warning for, some of the stuff that's in it. Truly, again, it's almost 70 years old. It's almost a 70-year-old book. And I would say some books, the ending is a surprise. I don't think just sort of the way the story flows, there's nothing terribly surprising about the end of the about how the book ends. It's it's very much a book about the journey. So I don't think it really spoils the enjoyment of the book to really read what's going on. And you know oh, and that's because I mentioned it at the beginning. That's another thing, that the scouring of the Shire. I've come to really appreciate, particularly when I really sort of started to appreciate sort of Gandalf's line, where they sort of, he shows up after the scouring of the Shire, and they ask, why didn't you help? And it's like, you didn't need my help. You went off to do these adventures, and you gained the skills and bravery to come back. And I think to some degree, I personally interpret it. I know Tolkien was very much against allegory, which I respect, and I see what he's talking about. But I personally interpret that as sort of being an argument in favor of the importance of myth and legends and fantasy. Is these stories of great deeds and heroism, and sort of imagining and going off and understanding and learning things from the world, allows you to come back and save your own world. And I think that's a very important note to it. Sort of noting on that, the adaptation by Peter Jackson, that has also been my favorite movie since it came out. I think I saw The Fellowship either the day it came out or the day after, and then had to see it the next day, because literally the first time I went to see it, watching the film, and right when they get to Rivendell, the film all of a sudden jumped to Mount Caradros and started running upside down and backwards. And since that was back in the days where the films were actually wound on a spool and must have been put in upside down or wound wrong or whatever, it was going to take it would take a couple hours to fix that. So okay, we'll give you vouchers, you can come back whenever. So I went back the next day, and the day after I got my wisdom teeth out. But I digress. But I saw them all several times in the theaters. I've watched the regular, and I particularly love the extended edition, Lord knows how many times. I will admit, when I was younger, I used to probably be not the most fun, at least if you weren't in the same mindset as me, watching the movies. Because as much as I love the movies, like I said, they've been my favorite movies since they come out. I spend a lot of time comparing it to the book and complaining, like, oh, they changed Aragorn's character completely, and why did they do this, and they cut this out, and really he was supposed to do this here, and really nitpicking it, really nitpicking it apart. And one of the things that sort of led me to come around on that is, it was an article. I have no idea where I read it, who wrote it by, so apologies. Otherwise, I would reference it by name or put a link below. But I read an article 10 or 15 years ago, maybe, somewhere 10 or 15 years ago, that really argued that the movie should be interpreted, that those movies, as well as really any movie adaptation of a book, should really be viewed as the director slash screenwriter's version of this, that is based on that is based on literary work. So really approaching it as the movies are Peter Jackson's, as they are often sort of labeled, they are Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, that happens to be based on the book by J.R.R. Tolkien. So basically interpreting the movie on its own merits, rather than comparing it to um, the book has led me to be a lot less nitpicky and allowed me to watch it and just enjoy what I'm seeing, not, rather than sort of being all over the place emotionally. It's like, oh my God, this is epic. I love this. Why did they change it? It's just pointless frustration of really just appreciating is that this is Tolkien's, this isn't the end all be all pure translation. That would be like a 40-hour movie, which I would watch, but to really get all that in there. But this is it's Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, and that's really saying something. Honestly, I'd still say, still comparing it, I would still say, if I were to give it as a grade purely on a book as a book adaptation, I'd say the movie gets it about 85, 90%. You get some of the notes of it misses some of the context, but you get some of the notes of melancholy. A lot of the scenes work really well and match pretty well with my imagination, or the ones that don't make sense, because there's just some things. A book and a written medium is very different from a film, which is, yes, dialogue is important and plot is important, but film is inherently a visual medium. Like the core of film is visual storytelling, and there's some things that just don't work, that work just fine when you're describing it in a book, but just wouldn't work all that well in a film. So, some of those, you know, giving it a free pass on some of those things, or anything that's was clearly changed or likely changed for, pure practicality, or, adding or increasing the role of increasing the role somewhat of, women in the film. That certainly it's in, Tolkien in the last decade of his life recognized how little women played a part in his stories, and was working to remedy that. So that even fits in with his own thing. So I'd still say it captures about 85-90% of the book personally, and those changes, as I said, I no longer bother me so much. Really because of that, but that, recognizing that this is Peter Jackson's interpretation of Lord of the Rings, not, anyway. I'm rambling on that, but it's really brilliant. Um, I'm still willing to talk about it. I am a nerd, so if someone, if down in the comments below, if someone wants to throw in, hey, this is what someone wants to throw in, start a discussion about, the differences between the movie and the books, and, debating some of that stuff, I'm happy to. I'm a nerd. I love talking about that stuff. I don't let it get in the way of mine and anybody I happen to be watching the movies with enjoyment, just sitting there endlessly nitpicking it. But it's a great movie. It's still my favorite, and I still think there's a small number of scenes where sort of the CGI is a little bit obvious, especially in some of the nicer, like HD 4K television, where there's sort of a clear differentiation between, like, the effects, like the creature effects online, like overlaid on real landscapes. But that's not too distracting. But overall, just the visuals and the scale and the scope for a 21 to 23-year-old film, depending upon which one we're talking about, holds up remarkably well. It's brilliantly acted. There's a couple bits of it, particularly at the end. To this day, every time I watch it, I'll fully admit I end up crying. Just with how well done it is. So yeah, that's it. That's in brief my thoughts on Lord of the Rings. So, I would love it if you were to like, share, subscribe. Again, I'd love to hear your comments. What do you think of Lord of the Rings? Who's your favorite character? What do you think of Peter Jackson's adaptation of it? Do you think there's, change in differences and stuff like that? How do you come to and interpret anything you want to talk about? I would love to hear from you if you want to post that down below. Um, that would be awesome, as well as, liking, sharing, subscribing, which would be great to help me and the channel out. Check out my website, socials, and check out my books. All of those are linked down below. Again, if you want to hear some more about sort of my general thoughts on Tolkien and my thoughts on The Hobbit, I'll link the videos here at the end. But for the moment, I do hope you all have a wonderful day, get a chance to do or experience something creative, and I'll catch you on the next one. The road goes ever on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road is gone, and I must follow it if I can, pursuing it with weary feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths or errands meet, and whither then I cannot say. Still round the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate, and though I oft have passed them by, a time will come at last when I shall take the hidden paths which run west of the